Hello and welcome to ILTV's Elections Arena. I'm Aaron Porras. And today in the ring, Likud members get geared up for party leadership primaries, while the rival Blue and White Party looks to get closer to the Haredi electorate. And joining us to discuss is Israeli attorney and legal advisor to the Israeli Movement for Governability and Democracy, or Meshilut, Simcha Rotman. And on the other side, we have columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com, Mark Schulman. Thank you both so much for being with us today. But first, we begin with campaign season in Israel, which is now restarting for the third time in under a year. And before the Likud gets involved with the show, however, leadership primaries for the Likud will be held in late December, and Prime Minister Netanyahu's main party rival, MK Gideon Sa'ar, seems to be gaining ground, with several Likud officials pledging their support. So, let's start with you, Mark. Why do you believe Sa'ar is getting this support? What is his base believing in? Where's his base coming from?
The realization that there's blood in the water at this point in terms of Netanyahu. There's a sense that 2 times he couldn't form a government. There's no reason to think he'll form it a third. And so therefore, he's no longer invincible. His great strength in terms of Netanyahu within the Likud was the fact that he kept on winning. And now that he's not winning so often, certainly his strength has dissipated to some extent. Plus, an awful lot of people in the Likud have been waiting a long time to move up. And so they've been waiting for this moment. I think that the feeling is that if there's another election, especially with him running under indictment, the odds of Likud doing better are slim. I mean, it's always possible, but are slim. So if we end up back where we were last time, or worse, for the Likud I'm talking about, then the voters just won't stand for it. And at some point, someone will break, and Blue and White will come to the government either without Likud or with Likud breaking apart.
Simcha?
I think maybe it's sad, maybe it's happy. You can be happy about it, but I don't think he really has a chance, and I don't think he thinks he has a chance. I think.
So why pursue the campaign if he doesn't think he's going to win?
Because it will position him in a very good place in the day after Netanyahu. He was the only one who ran with primaries. He has his base of supporters. It's a statement. And he made this statement even way before he knew there going to be a third election. If we all remember, right. He tweeted, "I'm ready." He made this statement. He challenged Netanyahu even before Netanyahu failed in forming a government. So he's positioning himself for the day after, and this is another step in that. I don't think he thinks he can win, and I have to disagree. The Likud went behind Menachem Begin for decades of losing miserably, time and again. In the Likud, people follow their leaders. They don't challenge sitting leaders.
Then I have to press you on this because here you have. Then I have to press you because you're saying that it's very unlike the Likud to do this, and that at any rate, Gideon Sa'ar is probably just positioning himself for future political games. But keeping that in mind, then. Again, the incentive here seems lost to me. Why show this fracture in the Likud if he doesn't actually want to take the leadership?
He wants to take the leadership, but he knows that the time today to do so will be the day after Netanyahu. Maybe Netanyahu will quit. Maybe Netanyahu will fail, and if the Likud will go to the opposition, probably Netanyahu will quit. He did it before. He's probably going to do it again if the Likud will sit in the opposition. So, and Sa'ar then will be ready to say, "Oh, I'm number 2, number 1 left. I'm number 1." It will be much easier than the other rivals on this spot.
All right. Well, so let's talk about Sa'ar's supporters. Who is his base?
His base are a group of members of Knesset and city mayors primarily, the ones who are outside the Knesset, who've come to the conclusion that the time has come for a change of leadership. Now, I agree, his chances are not all that great. I think his chances are a little better today than I would have thought a week ago, because I think there's been a break towards him. And one of the big questions in terms of Netanyahu is his strength is very, very, very strong until it disappears. And that's one of the questions. In other words, will it fall apart before the election takes place, and the primary election I'm talking about, or not? The odds are he'll hold on, but there is a chance that it could break. Because once, they always said about Netanyahu, no one's willing to come up against Netanyahu, but 5 people together would be happy to take him down in terms of the Likud. So everyone's been afraid to say anything because they're afraid to be that person out there taking him down. With Sa'ar up front getting most of the flack, I think others are willing to take a little more flack. We're seeing some of the other people not coming out in favor of Netanyahu. You have Erdogan, you have Edelstein saying that we're staying on the side. They're not coming out in favor of Netanyahu. So it's a big question. I think if I had to place the odds, I think Netanyahu will win. But I'm not positive. A week ago, I was positive Netanyahu would win. Now I think there's actually a chance, a small one, but a chance that there could be an upset.
Yep.
I'm reminding myself that Netanyahu lost, and Netanyahu was a former prime minister with all the prestige of a former prime minister when he challenged Sharon in 2002. Because and if you compare in 2002, we're not talking about the disengagement Sharon.
Right.
We're talking about 2002 Sharon. He was with the what were his chances of running the election and winning the election. He was called a murderer. He was very not popular in the Israeli public compared to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu lost. And and I believe chances to lose, and Sharon also has investigations on the Greek island at that time. So I think that Netanyahu chances to win are he probably going to win.
All right, well, let's look at a more ideological viewpoint now. Ideologically speaking, policy-wise, how do Sar and Netanyahu differ?
In my point of view, and now I speak in the Meshilut hat very strongly. I see that Sar says very specifically, I'm going to promote the override clause and giving the parliament the final word on legislation. I'm going to separate the roles of the legal advisor, chief legal advisor, and the attorney general, chief prosecutor. I will do a hearing to Supreme Court judges. Things that Netanyahu, for many, many years, stopped and praised himself on stopping. So on the issues of the legal system, and now Netanyahu got to the conclusion that the legal system in Israel is a problem, and he speaks about it. Sar was there all along, and Sar now is coming strong on those issues, and I think those issues might be the issues of next election, at least at some part, because we don't talk now about Palestinians. We don't talk about two-state solution anymore. Thank God for that.
Well, Sar actually, I think he has stated recently even that he believes in a one-state solution.
And Sar, you have to remember, the right-wing ideology, Sar never voted for the disengagement. You cannot say the same thing on Netanyahu. So Sar stands strong on ideological right, and the justice system is ideas are on the right, in my point of view, on the right place.
All right, now I'm going to change topic a little bit here. A new video actually just came out by Navid Romi of the Middle East Forum in Israel, talking about how, similar to Netanyahu's accusations that the indictments against him were fabricated to a degree, she pointed out to 5 or 6 various politicians throughout Israel, including now President Ruvi Rivlin, who had similar issues with the courts. How do you respond to such a video?
Look, I respond this way. I can understand if Mendelblit had been an appointee of the Mapai from God knows when, from 40 years ago. If all of these people, if the head of the police had been some appointee from a previous government, all these people are hanging on. But in a situation where almost everyone who investigated this case were Netanyahu appointees, to say that everything was all of the accusations were made up by the police, by whoever knows what, I think is an absurd case to be made. Listen, the courts can decide. You can go to the courts, and in the court of law, if Netanyahu has all sorts of proof that that he's not guilty, then sure, go right ahead and prove you're not guilty. But to say that it's all made up seems totally absurd, not to mention the fact, look, no one questions the issue of cigars and all of those gifts. Just remember something, getting gifts is illegal. Let's stop right there. So it's really a question of interpretation. You could say what he did is not really a crime, but it's not like they made up these stories. Everyone agrees with the facts pretty much.
Well, Simcha, you have actually written a book on this very topic. So what's your opinion legally here as well?
So we can discuss Netanyahu's cases, but I'm not talking about Netanyahu's cases. I'm talking about the big picture, and Netanyahu also spoke about the big picture. We know that you can say who invented this system. Aaron Barak in 1977 against Prime Minister Rabin. It's not. I don't agree with Netanyahu that it's an issue of taking down the right wing leaders. It's an issue of taking out the political leaders, whatever parties they're coming from. If they're coming from Kadima, if they're coming from the Likud, they're coming from the Avodah. Why is that? Because the justice system in the courts and in the justice ministry, they see elected officials deciding issues by themselves as a danger to what they hold as substantive democracy. What does it mean, substantive democracy? I don't know. But they see decision made by the majority of Israel, whatever the position is, as a danger, as a threat. That's why they That's why they took down Justice Minister Ne'eman. We're talking about 5 different justice ministers, former justice ministers, who say that, even before or after. We're talking about, again, Rubi Rivlin, the president. He was then the chairman. He is not some crazy whack job from some hilltop. And he says he called this the rule of law gang. That's the term he said on those issues. They to take down people who object to this interpretation by the court, trying to take power away from the public.
All right, well, so my final question maybe on this topic then is, Amir Ohana, the current justice minister, has actually just appointed Shai Nitzan, state prosecutor's replacement, at least in the interim, as Orly, I have her name here, Orly Ben-Ari Ginsburg, I'm sorry. How do you think that will affect this whole scenario currently?
So now we just heard also that the Attorney General
is
against it, and he said there is you cannot appoint her legally. Why? Because I don't think it's reasonable. I have to say, I don't know what do you make of it? If the justice minister can't appoint someone that the law says you can appoint.
Okay, first of all, the guy's not really a justice minister. He's the temporary justice minister of a temporary government, of the outgoing government of a temporary government. And we don't have a government in this country really legally.
But he's appointing a temporary. Chief prosecutor.
I'm not going to disagree with the problems in the justice system in this country. I think it all has to be thrown out, frankly. I think the basic problem, I blame Ben-Gurion, frankly, because Ben-Gurion stopped having a constitutional convention in this country. This country desperately needs a constitution. The fact that we don't have a constitution, all of these problems take place because we have disagreements on various levels. We have a justice system that I think is absurd. The fact that trials here take months and years as opposed to beginning and ending is an absurdity that only we've invented the idea that you have a trial one day a week over a period of 10 years. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not a lot.
No, not at all.
So, I mean, it's an absurd system, and it needs to be reformed completely.
But they don't let you reform the system.
But we need to come back with a plan and say what we want to do. It has to be someone's priority, and it doesn't take place in the middle of an investigation of a prime minister. That's the whole problem.
Yeah, but for the last 24 years, there was never a single day without an investigation of a prime minister or a justice minister. That's the system. You cannot say, we have to wait. They won't investigate any prime minister. They investigated Netanyahu for 17 different issues with nothing coming out of it until on the 18, 19, and 20s they found maybe something. You cannot run a country like that. And that's exactly the system that Rubi Rivlin talks about. That's exactly the system former Justice Minister Ne'eman talks about. Former Justice Minister, Professor of Law Daniel Friedman speaks about. That's the kind of system a democratic country cannot have. And that's the problem. You never reform the system because they're investigating all the politicians. We had Mismach Yitzhaki, the chief investigator, saying, "Bring me whatever you have on elected officials. I need to put them in one paper so I can know who I can extort." You cannot have a country run like that. I think you will agree with that.
That I don't disagree with, but I think that you don't play this game in the middle of a time when the prime minister has been indicted. If the prime minister resigns, let the prime minister resign, and then have them indict Gantz on the issue of the fifth dimension. They will always find, because that's what they are looking. They're not looking for crimes. They're looking to see. That I disagree with.
Okay, disagree with the former justice ministers.
Well, on that note, we're going to have to agree to disagree and move on to our next topic. Coming back to general elections now, Israeli President Rivlin is urging the public not to lose faith in democracy as the interim government's mandate is extended. And he says that we have both the chance to fight for the right to disagree, as well as a duty to find common ground. Well, to that end, it seems that the Blue and White Party will be the first to change tactics, reportedly easing demands for secular policy in hopes of courting the ultra-Orthodox parties. And so let's talk about this. Now, party number 2 with the Blue and White has Yair Lapid. He has given up on his rotation agreement. And there are other sort of initiatives that Blue and White is now attempting to bring the Haredi parties closer to them. How do you think that's going to fare?
I think when you build a party with no ideology and you say what all I want to do is to get rid of Netanyahu, you can change your policies day in, day out, like Yair Lapid did for the last 10 years or something that he's in politics, 9 years, 8 years, I don't remember exactly how much. And he will definitely will not get any ultra-Orthodox voting for him. I think he might lose some of his ultra-secular
So you think this will bite
voters,
him in the end?
and they will go to Lieberman because and maybe that's a good thing because
Why Lieberman?
because
Why the Israel Beitenu party?
because Israel Beitenu specifically took this flag, and because blue and white has no ideology. If you take the flag, they have nothing. So Lieberman is much more authentic when he speaks. I don't believe him also because he was also with the ultra-Orthodox parties all around. But you know what his voters want, his core voters, what they want, and he plays with that. And if blue and white will lose this ultra-secular, they will lose their voters.
First of all, they would lose them to Meretz, frankly, or whatever the Meretz runs under, whether it's Democratic Front or Meretz. Those where they'll go. They're not going to go to Lieberman most likely. Second of all, look, I'm not sure about that. That was a flag he floated. The reality is, when Lapid no longer took part in rotation, some commentators in the ultra-Orthodox world said, well, now we could potentially sit together with blue and white. I repeat what I've said before. We go back to 1984. There's been an agreement between the ultra-Orthodox and Likud that the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi parties have not broken once. They've only been with Likud since that period of time. Shas has, on the other hand, broken that and gone with Barak, for instance. So it's a possibility. I think, look, what is blue and white's main flag, so to speak, or what's their main issue? The word that he uses, meshilut, governance, good governance, people who are qualified to do...
So you disagree that the prime directive, so to speak, of the blue and white party is to get rid of Netanyahu?
It's to bring good governance to the country. It's to bring people who are capable of doing a job. I mean, Likud has a bunch of people, none of whom are capable of doing each one of their jobs as ministers, by and large. None of them have the experience, none of them have shown any great ability at any of their jobs. Blue and white is trying to say we're going to bring people with experience, with knowledge, and we're going to follow procedures. That's what they're mostly running on.
So do you see an opportunity to form a coalition today that was previously unavailable yesterday?
Possibly, but unlikely. Look, it depends on what the results of the elections are. I think if blue and white gets 2 or 3 more seats, and if the difference between them and Likud is even greater, then it's going to be harder and harder for other parties not to agree to join them in a coalition.
I think if we have this 55 block, and it might be a little bit larger, it might be a little bit smaller, but and the Arab parties are out of the questions because they don't want, and blue and white don't want them, so it's mutual. I don't think that we will be stuck. The only way to get rid of this impasse is either votes going away from Lieberman to either blue and white or the Likud, or, and second, and that might be the issue, the new right, a second right-wing strong party that will take votes from, and then they won't be in Netanyahu's pocket. And if they're not there, people might vote for them even from blue and white, from Lieberman and from the Likud, and they might balance the Lieberman deadlock.
The only way it's going to end is if Netanyahu resigns or takes a deal. I mean, look, we have to keep that as a possibility. It's been talked about more and more, the possibility that Netanyahu will take a deal and will resign in return for immunity. That's a real possibility.
I want to go back to maybe the differences between the religious Haredi parties and blue and white specifically. You know, what are the ideological differences here other than the ones on the surface? Say, for example, the Haredi draft, which really doesn't sound to me like blue and white even was really pushing so hard for. So with Lapid out of the picture, what changed so dramatically that the Haredi parties are willing to deal?
Lapid declared war on the ultra-Orthodox public, not only the ultra-Orthodox politicians. Many people don't like the ultra-Orthodox politicians, some even from the ultra-Orthodox community. But when you declare war on the public, then the voters will never let the people do anything with you. So in the ultra-Orthodox communities, they still remember the days that Lapid was the minister of finance, the treasury, and the harsh cut to all budgets, to the education, and so people remember that. And they remember it in a very post-traumatic way. So they will never have Lapid. But Lapid is not really out of blue and white.
Right.
He might. That's why I think they will never go. The only thing that can happen.
I mean, you reject all these analysts from Haredi areas, from Haredi populace?
Yeah, I don't think it will happen.
Look,
I think that what might happen is that the section from blue and white, headed by Gantz, will take the lead not only within blue and white, they will just split, and then they can join whoever they want.
Splitting. That's just a theory that's pushed by the Likud.
Yeah, but Netanyahu is getting a deal all the time, right?
The reality here is that there is three issues that separate the Haredim from, let's say, blue and white, or the blue and white voters. Let's put it that way. The draft issue is a minor issue. No one really wants the Haredim in the army at this point. The army doesn't need them, and no one really wants them. The real issues are, one, basic education for Haredi children, because the economy needs people who are educated, who can do basic math and everything else. And the feeling is that unless we force basic education, we're going to have an economic disaster in another 20 years. Number two, the issue of marriage, divorce, and all of those issues that people are continually upset about now for 30 years, but the fact that that all the Rabbanim are from the Haredi community, and they make decisions relating to all those things, and they affect everybody else in the country. And the issue of the Shabbat buses, that the ones that started now in the Dan area,
having protests in Bnei
right, Bnei Brak to stop, and so the proper agreement between the two, the compromise would be, we'll look the other way for what exists now. We won't create anything nationally. That might be a compromise that may or may not work. But to try to take it away now, once you give people something, which in terms of the secular population, a bus on Shabbat that takes you to the beach, it'll be really, really hard to take that away at this point without creating lots of trouble.
Final 30 seconds.
I think that to think that Netanyahu will take a deal or something is wishful thinking. I think that Netanyahu is going to win the election in the Likud. I don't know what will happen in the general election, but
so
if Lieberman will stay strong, we'll maybe go to the fourth election.
All right, well, that's unfortunately all the time that we have in the elections arena. I'd like to thank our guests, Simcha Rotman and Mark Schulman, for joining us. And thanks, of course, to all of you for tuning in. Also, remember that for more news from ILTV, please follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.